finding that with some of the movies in this marathon, I feel like I have to justify their inclusion in a wholesome Halloween list. Like, no, please come back. I swear this movie about cannibal babies is wholesome and lovely. I swear it. And that's because the goal of this marathon is to make people challenge their preconceptions of horror, should they have any. And I feel like this movie, more than arguably any other movie on the list, is the one that I need to justify the most.
Because on paper, it's a Halloween movie. It's part of a franchise that is as stereotypically horror as horror gets. A big scary dude in a mask kills a bunch of teenagers. I mean, how many films can this describe? Don't get me wrong, Halloween, and I'm talking the original here, not the 2018 sequel/reboot we're covering this video, is bloody brilliant. It's fantastic, like legitimately an all-time classic in any genre. I'm not trying to belittle it when I describe it plainly like this and point out how many different franchises and its own sequels and reboots fit the exact same base description. But what I am saying is that if you ask somebody who doesn't really watch horror but that has formed an idea of what it is through pop cultural osmosis to describe what a horror movie might perhaps look like, if they didn't put forward something of the ilk of the recently popularized torture porn genre of something like Saw or Hostel, they would probably describe something very close to Halloween.
The concept of the original Halloween, and to some extent the franchise as a whole, is so simple and entrenched in our understanding of what the horror genre, or to be more specific, the subgenre of slashers, is. And that's because Halloween kind of set the mold for everything that followed. While not the first slasher by any means, it did kind of become the blueprint that countless films after it would homage, imitate, or simply rip off.
And so by the time you get to the 2000s, we've already had decades of iconic and not so iconic murderous men becoming so entrenched in the cultural zeitgeist that they're now theme park characters. And there's films like Scary Movie taking the piss out of their biggest scenes, and there's literally even a parody boy band called the Slash Street Boys where these characters sing about their murders. So it gets to a point where you don't even need to have given so much as a sideways glance towards the horror section in a blockbuster one time 20 years ago to have some concept of what these films are about.
I could ask my mum, for example, who hates horror films and would refuse to watch them, what the Halloween movies are about. And she'd probably say something like, oh, that's that horrible film where he just goes around killing people. And to be honest, she's not wrong.
And that's why I really want to include this particular movie, because 2018's Halloween is that film. On a surface level, my mum's description would be correct. It is everything I have said that horror doesn't necessarily have to be. It is kinda mean. It's intensely violent. It's problematic, as unfortunately a lot of horror is, in the way that it depicts people with mental illness as dangerous despite statistically them being more likely to be the victims of violence, not the perpetrators. People, including children, die in it, who do nothing to deserve their fate, and often in graphic, brutal, painful ways, and are never mentioned again, thrown to the side as nothing more than voyeuristic cannon fodder. The film arguably even delights in this, lingering on the violence, going into meticulously grisly detail like showing Michael Myers drop the bloody teeth of a man he just murdered onto a dirty bathroom floor.
And yet, this is kind of a comfort movie for me. And I realise that, given the description I have just delivered, this may make me seem like a bit of a psychopath. But I swear to you that this film, at its core, is about overcoming trauma and the powers of maternal love. Yep, this movie, the one with all the stabbing, it's lovely. I'm not even joking, it is a really quite lovely film.
Set 40 years after the events of the original Halloween and retconning everything but that first movie, Halloween 2018 is a direct sequel, once again following Laurie Strode, the sole surviving final girl of the original Halloween movie. Only now she's become this older, paranoid shut-in, trapped in her past trauma and drinking heavily while training and preparing relentlessly for the day that she believes inevitable, when her would-be killer Michael Myers breaks out of his incarceration and comes back to finish the job. This puts her at odds with her family, alienating her from her daughter Karen, who the state took away from her at age 12, and Laurie's only remaining social communication is with her granddaughter Allison. While each of the Strode women try to live their own lives, horror eventually strikes, exactly as Laurie predicted would happen when Michael breaks out and returns to continue his massacre from 40 years ago.
Again, fairly simple plot really, it's just another Michael massacre. The only difference this time is it's set against the backdrop of a broken family dynamic and 40 years later. But there's much more meat on the bones than that surface level description.
Laura quite clearly has PTSD, and it has ruled her life for 40 fucking years. She's fortifying her house, she's borderline alcoholic, she's presumably spending a shit ton of money on ammo, like, Jesus love, judging by the holes on these dummies, that's like my year's earnings. And all of this in preparation for an event that everybody in her life is telling her is never going to happen, and she really needs to get over things. This setup is a great way to show how trauma not only affects the people who suffer from it, but also has a rippling effect on everyone around them. It can change the way relationships pan out. It can change your personality and attitudes and worldview in ways that other people can find abrasive and potentially hard to deal with, and it really sucks. It's fucking dreadful when a horrible thing happens to a person that's potentially going to affect them in some small or not so small way for possibly the rest of their life. And with Laurie here, the way that the world and even her own family belittle her suffering is an unfortunate reality a lot of people who suffer through trauma have to experience. And so it is so gratifying and empowering not only when Laurie is vindicated in her supposed paranoia, but when she also uses and manipulates that past trauma, one that has in the past divided her family, into a tool that has the potential to save them. It is only through the harsh experiences of her past and how she chose to cope with that she even has a fighting chance of protecting herself and her loved ones when Michael comes back to town. It's such a strong evolution of what was once an extremely simplistic character, and such a great look at victimhood and trauma in general. I find it pretty hard hitting how in the movie all anyone wants to talk about when it comes to Laurie is her suffering. They don't see the person, they see the survivor. And she has no personhood in the eyes of anyone besides her granddaughter. She's just the crazy mom, or the news story, or the hysterical old woman. And it's no wonder she's so hell-bent on killing Michael for good, because even though he's been absent from her life all this time, he still has such a control over her. He controls her actions now, he controls how people perceive her. It's really quite a grounded depiction of the burden of trauma. And that alone, before you even consider the fact that it's also just a really good, tense, and genuinely pretty scary horror film, is to me worth the price of admission.
I can't believe that Danny McBride wrote on this thing. I know he's not the only writer on the team, but his public persona is so oppositional to the level of nuance being presented here that I just can't wrap my head around him being involved at all. Also, John Carpenter returns on this thing. Not as director, mind you. That was David Gordon Green, who made what? Pineapple Express and Your Highness? How the hell are these people making Halloween? No, John Carpenter returns here as composer. Although he is obviously more famous as a director, his musical works are often equally as brilliant and iconic, and his version here of the Halloween theme, where he remixes it ever so slightly, is just it's to die for. I hate how talented this man is. Imagine making both Halloween and The Thing. Like, piss off, man.
Anyway, this film has one of my favourite moments in any horror movie, ever. And I want to talk about it, but since this is a somewhat new release, I will say it is minor spoilers. So if you don't want to hear it, jump ahead to this point in the video. Otherwise, please allow me to fanboy. So what I really love about this movie is not just how it evolves on the Laurie Strode character and tells this really excellent narrative about trauma and familial maternal relationships, but also how it does this specifically by being a Halloween movie. Like, this isn't a story you can just tell as its own thing. You can certainly try to do the same plot about a wrote-off trauma victim finding the strength to finally take on her tormentor on equal footing, but it wouldn't be quite as effective were it not a Halloween movie. And to illustrate that point, I want to talk about how they repurpose iconography from the original to completely subvert its meaning. In the first film, there's a scene in the climax where Michael attacks Laurie and takes a tumble out of the window into the garden below. a seemingly fatal fall. However, when Laurie looks back down at the space where the body fell, Michael is gone. Big scary moment for Laurie. Where the fuck is he? Am I still in danger? Oh my god, he's still alive. Fast forward 40 years later, and now Laurie is the one to fall from a window in a scene that repeats this iconography. And honestly, it's the simplest thing, but when Michael looks back to see where she fell, she's gone.
When I saw this moment play out in the cinema, I genuinely had tears in my eyes. My god, I'm so fucking lame. I legitimately remember doing this like breath thing where I kind of like, as it happened, was like, oh, that's my girl.
Right there is this moment that 40 years ago marked a particularly horrifying memory in a sea of horrifying memories for this character, and here she is, 40 years later, repurposing that exact memory, weaponizing it for herself, using it for her, using it for her family.
You can be pedantic about this and be all like, oh, how did she survive that fall? You know, it makes sense that Michael would because he's like an indestructible dude, but she's just a woman, she should be dead. To do so would be to fundamentally miss the point. This is a moment that exists in the realm of metaphor, not in reality. And metaphorically speaking, her trauma is now her strength. And this is articulated right in this moment in the cleanest possible illustration of that point. Fuck yes! Fuck yes! God, I love Halloween, man. Told you this was a wholesome movie. I mean, besides all the bloody teeth and gratuitous murders and stuff, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, you know? That's kind of what I'm saying. That even the horroriest of horror films, the literal Halloween franchise, the granddaddy of slasher cliches, still has so much more to say than just murders and frights. Fucking love this film. It's my favourite Halloween sequel by far, and I honestly find it such a comforting watch. Like, yes, it is another massive murder madman movie, but it's also a film that says the worst parts of your life don't have to define you, and that you can even find strength in your darkest moments, and that is bloody lovely. And I've just remembered this far into production that I have already done a video on this that is arguably more in depth. Shit. Well, this is too far gone to not come out now. Remember to subscribe to my OnlyDans, I guess. Bollocks.